everybody, it's time for another episode of Liftoff. We are so happy that you are joining us. As always, we want to say hello, your fabulous hosts here, to make sure you know exactly what you're going to be looking forward to for this month's topic, which is sustainability in space. A good one. But hey, I am Meredith Rocket Girl Garofalo. I am a certified broadcast meteorologist and space and science correspondent. I have had so many amazing opportunities in my career to do stories, interviews, social media posts from leaders all around the world talking about space, and then specifically how girls and women in STEM, we can get more of them in space careers as well. So we are very happy to have you with us as always. It's going to be a fun session for us. So I'll pass it over to Ubaldo to say hello. Hello, hello.
Hi, how's it going, everybody? Thank you, Meredith. Yes, it's good to be back for another great episode of Liftoff. Ubaldo, the space ace Ciminieri here. And yeah, the sustainability for this episode for me. So background, I'm chief of staff for a company called Cislunar Industries, and we are a space industry startup focused on really building kind of a sustainable way for us to live and work in space. And we want to be a key part of that, but also do it in a very sustainable way, right? We don't want to take the things from Earth that aren't good for the environment or for humanity. We don't want to take that stuff with us. So how do we, how do we enable a way for us as humanity to spread out into the universe, but to do it in a better way? You know, we have a lot of history to learn from, and we don't need to take a lot of that stuff with us. So I'm very excited about this particular conversation, and we've got some really incredible guests to guide us through that. I think mainly from a policy perspective. I think that's sort of the lens through which we're looking at this today, because we want to make sure that there are things in place that guide us as we do this, because we're going to do it. We need to do it. It's sort of in our DNA, but we want to make sure that we do it in the right way, in a responsible way. So thanks for being here, and I'll pass it over to Daniel Tompkins. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Dr. Daniel Tompkins, agricultural scientist and working in sustainable agriculture for the last 20 plus years, and founder of a company called Grow Mars, where it's very exploration sustainability focused. A lot of different elements of sustainability in space. We're mostly focused on the exploration side of sustainability and sustainment. So happy to be here. Pass it back to Meredith.
Hey, you forgot to say you're Dr. Plant.
I guess I got my new podcast name.
Is that
right? It's
it?
sort of a trail name, right? I guess it's Dr.
I like it. Yeah.
Or you could put a Z on the end, Dr. Plant, if you want to be super cool, right? Isn't that what the kids are doing these days?
Is that what it is? Is that what it is? I wasn't sure.
Well, regardless, we are going to kick things off, as always, with the Rocket Girl Report, which is a little bit of taking what I love and am passionate about, reporting, but also hitting on some of the big topics that are happening in the space industry during the month. Or I like to kind of branch out from the topic that we have and give it a completely different perspective. So the Rocket Girl Report this week, we're going to kind of mesh together our topic of sustainability, but we're also going to talk about another big topic, which is girls getting into space, getting into STEM. And I am so excited to have on our show this week Dr. Mindy Howard. She is bringing space a bit closer to Earth and to any girl from any socio-economic demographic in the world with dreams of being an astronaut. Dr. Mindy Howard is founder and CEO of Cosmic Girls Foundation. She is empowering the female space generation by upskilling girls worldwide with space education and training, following her dynamic career across 35 countries as an engineer, trainer, and sustainability leader. There's the keyword, sustainability in the oil industry. And Mindy, we're so happy to have you here because you actually have a foundation, the Cosmic Girls Foundation, and you're helping get kids globally, especially young women, excited about being part of that sustainability and being part of that future.
That's right. That's right. Where our vision is launching dreams in girls and girls into space in order to become multiplanetary. So it's a long-term ride for getting more girls into space, but that's what we're here to do.
So why don't you give us just a little quick background about some of the successes you guys have had, maybe some awards or just some things, that you want to share about your company, just so we could have a better understanding of what you've been working on.
Well, we have, we're just essentially starting out our ride, but we're doing lots of things to get girls involved. First of all, in the foundation, initially, in trying to get more girls into what I would call the astronaut or the technical talent pipeline or the astronaut talent pipeline for women. It's a long-term journey to get girls interested in space to begin with, and then basically keeping them in the pipeline while they're getting skills, soft skills, harder skills, and then eventually astronaut training so that they can eventually, get the winning space flight. But I mean, all of these steps, are really, it's a leaky pipeline because there's girls kind of leaving the pipeline, all the time. And so we're trying to sort of like keep them in the pipeline by getting them engaged. For example, getting them interested in space. We have our new Cosmic Forum, which is all about, like-minded girls getting a chance to talk to one another, like worldwide, sharing their hopes, their dreams, and talk about space, stuff that's on their mind, stuff that they see are obstacles. A lot of girls these age see other girls maybe doing on Instagram, hair and makeup and not necessarily pondering quantum physics or wanting to improve the planet through space and technology. So they're finding one another on this Cosmic Forum. And it's like for the first time, some of them get to see other girls like themselves. So that's kind of inspiring. We also are having a summer, our worldwide partners who are actually giving are essentially giving a lot of the education to the girls. Some of them actually have summer programs, so we can talk about that a bit later. So that's also giving girls, free, free of charge. It doesn't cost them anything. They can join up and learn so many cool things. And then we have our worldwide competition that's happening in the fall. I'm not saying when, but essentially that is when the girls will actually have a chance to sign up and eventually, potentially win world-class astronaut training and then a space flight. So we're trying to keep them in the pipeline. We're trying to, keep them engaged and kind of say to them that, we want you and you are welcome here in this space. So hopefully we're gonna, we need people like you to spread the word and get as many girls as possible, 14 to 19, to sign up for this.
No, I think that's so important. I mean, you said it right there. A lot of times girls don't know what they want to be or what they want to do. And unfortunately, now we do have those influences like TikTok and Instagram, and they see these girls on there that are just influencers by fashion, by dressing, by doing makeup trends. And, there's a place for everybody. But for those women that maybe have that dream that they want to do something more with their life, maybe they want to be a teacher of space topics, or maybe they do want to be like me, a meteorologist or a space weather forecaster, they need those positive role models in those programs, because I really think a lot of the learning has to come not just from in the classroom, but especially now from positive influences that are outside of the classroom.
Indeed. Totally agree.
So let's talk a little bit about the importance of, that combination of girls in STEM and space careers, because when we talk about sustainability, I mean, you're going to need engineers in space. You're going to need technicians in space. You're going to need rocket scientists and astronauts. So there's a lot of room for these girls to kind of get that imagination going, but also keep them excited about it.
Indeed. I mean, it's no surprise that, there's a workforce shortage of people in the technical and aerospace industries. And that's going to get worse. By 2030, they're saying there's a huge kind of talent gap. We're going to need all hands on deck to fill that shortage with capable, tech-savvy girls, getting girls into the pipeline that weren't there before. But not only, like I said, getting them into the pipeline, but keeping them in the pipeline, keeping them in the workforce, which is the big contribution to sustainability in space question. But I think additionally, if we're talking about going multi-planetary and starting to think about living on other planets, we need to also start focusing on females, because women have, ACE has done a study on how efficient women are compared to men in terms of for space, including, using less food, physical space, oxygen, and water, and why it makes sense for them to be maybe the first inhabitants of Moon and Mars, based on, that as well as their natural talents of building communities and kind of showing empathy. But so in order to make that happen, we're going to need to start doing research on women's bodies, how they respond to different microgravity environments, including reproductive cycles, menopause. And there's very little data because there's only been 10% of all the astronauts who are women. And so that hasn't been a focus of space agencies until fairly recently. So, short term on Earth, yes, we need to fill the shortage of people, but I think long term, multiplanetary, I think the focus really needs to be much more on women in the future.
No, I think you said that well. I mean, we actually, a couple episodes ago, we were talking to somebody who's studying reproductive, and even we had an episode in February about sex in space, and we were talking about, men and women, like they say, what, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I mean, if we're going to be talking about going interplanetary, I mean, you already start with that, which has been talked about for decades. But, what was it that got you interested in this thought process? Because, there's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of things, but you're specifically looking at focusing on the future of women in space.
No, indeed. I mean, part of it comes from sort of my own career and trying to kind of make my own way in the space industry, and some of the, what I would call non-inclusive behavior or non-welcoming behavior, from the good old boys space network. I know what it's like to feel like an outsider in this business. And quite frankly, I didn't want other girls and women to go through what I went through. So I really am motivated to rewrite the stories of space women to come so they don't have to go through what I did. And I think the foundation is a great start in, in making girls feel included, and giving those skills that they're going to want to stay in for the long haul.
So parents that might be listening, maybe teachers or educators, there's no better time to start now encouraging them to look outside at foundations such as yours. So especially this summer, I mean, there's a lot of time away from school. I mean, you don't want kids to be like, oh, I have to do homework, it's the summer. But how can our parents, our public figures, our leaders talk to these kids and say, hey, there's stuff you can do during the summer that's fun, but it's also going to keep you excited and actually get ready for the next school year?
Well, what's kind of cool, I mentioned it a little bit in the beginning, is that we have several program partners that are going to be offering sessions over the summer. For example, just to name a few, Rocket Women offering space, like learning activities, things to do at home. Nerdy Girl Success has a mentoring program. Vogel, which is a Brazilian partner that we have, is offering free analog astronaut training, and Habitate Marte is also another Brazilian organization that's working with us, and Limitless Space Institute, as well as Meta Visionaries Academy. So they're offering like a virtual reality space program that people can join, which makes them feel like they're on Mars. So there's a lot of stuff. Like Rocket Women, I saw also they have like a schedule about all these different sort of home events that people can click on and see, all these different types of learning events and things that people can do at home. So it's pretty cool, actually. There's a lot out there. You want kids to go outside in the summertime, but when they're maybe tired and want to chill out, they can do something like this, which is also fantastic.
I was going to say, I mean, my best friends have little ones, and it's very interesting to me from when we grew up to watch them on their tablets. Now, some of the parents, unfortunately, I've seen let them be on their tablets all the time. And I think a lot of our guests can agree. But for some, it's like, okay, well, that's the dinner time activity, or it's a little bit of time each day. And I think if we can find these resources online, we can use them as tools to work into something that's becoming more and more, I guess you could say, the likelihood of what kids are going to be making a part of their everyday life.
True, indeed. Yeah. And like I said, Rocket Women has a great sort of list of things to do. So I would check out their website too.
So, Mindy, I mean, this is another personal question, because our whole episode is about sustainability, and we kind of touched on that in the beginning. But, what are your biggest concerns for the future with sustainability? I mean, do you think, especially when it pertains to women, do you think if we don't have enough research and training done now, then that's going to be a problem in the future based on what you were talking about?
Totally. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like getting more women in the game so that there could be more focus on them, as opposed to like, oh yeah, we have an astronaut and she happens to be a woman, you know, I guess we got to do some extra stuff, but instead, actually actively, proactively saying, this is our focus. We need to figure this out if we're going multiplanetary, and we need to know and understand what's going on with women with microgravity, and how their bodies react. But so that's definitely a big one. Yeah, and the sustainability. I mean, back to sort of environmental sustainability. All of the space debris is something that is troubling when you see the picture of the planet with all these dots around it, and you just think, wow, we really got to do something about that. So that's another thing, not related to Cosmic Girls, but just something that I am concerned about. That it's let's send more stuff up and not think about how to decommission some of these things when they're not working anymore. It's and how to bring it back down. To me, that's something that's in my head that kind of comes and goes, and it's I hope we're going to do more things on that in the future.
And with that, I'd love to bring in Ubaldo or Daniel if either of you have a question for Mindy, or you want to kind of expand on what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many points in here that are swimming in my head because of what you two have been talking about, because it's so important. Like, there's so many things we need to happen, right, to make this future.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of parallels in agricultural science with the turnover. It's very much a generational turnover coming in the next 10 years as well. And the retention is a big issue.
From us, right? At some point in the future is going to be critical. And I don't think we have that pipeline. So
No.
that's, so that there's an impact on, building a sustainable future for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like what, because I've heard different timelines from different people, like how much time do we really have to get enough people, enough of our children interested in space to really truly keep the trend up? What's your perspective on that? Like, how long do you think we have? It's sort of like an apocalyptic question, but
I don't know. I mean, it depends how fast you want to go multiplanetary. I mean, if you want to take SpaceX's vision of, in the next 5 to 10 years, sending 1 million people on Mars, we've done some calculations, and we're talking, if you want to get 1 million people on Mars, let's say even you get the majority of them being women, not even like all of them, 600,000. We figured out that it would take 100 million girls to start on that journey, so that you could eventually end up with 3 million girls that will then go on for training, education and training, that will then go on to be able to go in and even be good enough to go into space, but who knows if they're going to stay in space, and they like going to Mars, long term. You might want to go first to, let's say, one of the space stations that's coming up, or the moon, and maybe after that people go, well, it's enough, that's fine, and never make it to Mars. So getting all of those people to the end game of Mars, who want to stay there, you need a lot. So we thought of like 100 million, let's say, girls just going through that pipeline to get the numbers of even 600,000, and that's in a period of like 10 years, 8 to 10 years. So it's got to happen. And so we're here and positioned to help bring that awareness and try to make that happen. But of course we need support. in order to do this, because we are a charity at this point. And, you know, and we need to make, if we make that happen, you know, we need to sort of really scale up.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what's exciting about this conversation today, because we have some really great perspectives. To your point, as a charity, right? It's you know, there's so much that you have to overcome and to make the impact that you really want to make. But I think that's where having, you know, some like official policies and other things to support that, we need all that, right? To create this collaboration, this intersection that we need to happen, I think really comes out of all of these different groups and agencies working together. And I think we're seeing little bits of that, you know, but again, what more can we do? What more can we do from a policy perspective to make it more of a reality? And I think that's that. So Meredith, are we ready to jump into the
I think
whole
Daniel,
conversation?
when you
Oh,
were
Daniel,
flying
sorry.
in and
Yeah.
out of gravity, Daniel, you were making a really good point. If you want to
Sorry.
wrap us up with that, no, it's all right. That's the fun part about live podcasting, right?
Sorry, there was a lag.
Yeah.
I think it was on my end. Yeah, I was just mentioning that there's a big generational turnover in agricultural science that it is really similar, it seems like, to the space workforce as well. And retention is a big challenge. Female scientists, recruiting them for a long haul, you know, a 30-year career is often what it takes to get to these leadership positions within the industry. So the other thing that comes to mind is George Mason did an interesting paper where it took 22 people was the minimum number needed to start a colony on Mars. And the way they had mapped that was different personality types. And you wonder, you know, maybe we have the mix of right personality types in the male cohort, but do we have the right mix of personality types in the female cohort? So I think that it's a very dynamic equation here to sustainability. Looking at the group dynamics, I'm always blown away at the role that women have as part of analog astronaut groups. Is that, you know, they really have a critical function, I see, in the group dynamics there. Yeah, all for increasing this as part of that sustainability element.
I'm curious what you think the role is. You see the role. I'm hoping you're not going to say cleaning toilets.
No,
I
no,
refuse that rule. I'll tell you that right now.
no. No, I'm 5-year stay-at-home dad with twins, so I'm very very flexible in rules for sure, both personally and professionally. So I just see, you know, it would be interesting to see that dynamic. You know, maybe that same study, but you know, different ratios. You know, you have the same personality types with different gender roles. That definitely has, I think, a play into the social dynamics. But what outside of my expertise, I just know that oftentimes working in agricultural settings, when it's a whole group of guys, you know, there can be good outcomes, there can be bad outcomes. Usually, the better, more consistent, better outcomes is when there is a diverse research group, particularly within the agricultural sciences, working on at a specific university center or within a certain business, even farming operation, for sure.
We really appreciate Mindy. I don't know if you want to have a closing remark or not, but I think you've given a lot of us just a lot to think about in a whole different topic. I mean, like you said, all those women needed just to settle on Mars. That's a big deal. And that's a lot of people to train in the next 10 years.
Indeed. Yeah. No, and it really is the reason for being as we exist, you know, as a charity, because the world needs us, and I think that acknowledgement would be great. I think as a last remark, I just would love to tell your listeners that they're very welcome. If they know other girls 14 to 19 who would like to get involved in our forum or with our program partners to do some space education or our competition, they are very welcome. And for any corporates who are inspired what we're doing, we'd really love your financial support to make these big plans of ours a reality. And they should contact us on our social media details, which I hope we can make available, somewhere so that people can find us. So I could also tell you what it is.
Yeah, or throw them in the chat as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but
we'll do
yeah,
that.
tell us for sure.
We'll do
Yeah,
that.
tell
Yes,
us real quick. Give us the website, and then that way. But yes, we'll also share everything out as well.
Okay, perfect. Now it's cosmicgirls.org. That's easy.
Perfect.
And then
Love
we
it.
have our other stuff we'll put in the chat.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Ubaldo, I mean,
My
just
pleasure.
segueing into our next guests. This is a great topic, and I think, like she said, this is something with sustainability, especially, we have to start now.
Absolutely, and that's bringing on two guests to kind of continue to fill in the parts of the conversation around this. So let me do quick intros, and then we'll have kind of a roundtable discussion. So Jourdan Johnson is an international relations scholar. She uses an interdisciplinary approach to study the role of international norms in institutions on space sustainability. So I love that international perspective. She founded Space Futures Consulting. She's contributed to multinational corporations with her expertise. She also offers mentoring opportunities. I think that's a big thing too that we need to talk about is that sort of mentorship aspect of building sustainability, right? Particularly for those who are outside of the industry, like I was, and who want to get into it, but they're not sure how to do that. So she offers those opportunities. She really dedicates herself to contributing to a sustainable, equitable future on and off Earth. And, we got to talk about Earth. Earth is our spaceship, and we need to keep that conversation at the forefront as well. She's volunteered with several international nonprofits, supporting their fundraising efforts. And she serves on the Mustard Seed Project Bean with, she's on the board in Portland, Maine, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So first of all, welcome, Jourdan. And then I also want to introduce Charity Weeden. So Charity and I met when she was a part of Astroscale, which is a big partner of Cislunar Industries. She's currently the Associate Administrator for the NASA Office of Technology, Policy, and Strategy within the Office of the NASA Administrator, which is so cool. The office provides data and evidence-driven technology, policy, and strategy advice to NASA leadership and supports NASA leadership in developing and guiding the agency's activities across their 6 mission directorates. And as the lead for the organization, Charity brings her extensive experience and background in space sustainability and policy and regulatory issues. And so thank you both for being here. Welcome. Hi. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to be here and be part of this conversation. It's already, the information that Mindy's already given has been pinging lots of ideas in my head. So I'm excited to get into this.
So yeah, Jourdan, let's start there. What of what Mindy and Meredith talked about, like what sticks out to you and like aligns with kind of the work that you're doing?
So yeah, just from a local perspective, I have a small child. He just turned 6. So the first couple of years when he was in preschool, I would volunteer and teach space sustainability to preschool kids. We would use bubbles. We would make them pretend they're satellites and try to get them to run away from the bubbles and basically have like sit down discussions about, from their perspective, what could we do to clean up space? And I gotta say, even from a very young age, you're going to see a lot of overlap from what we're actually already doing. So I appreciate Mindy's effort. They say that typically children start to lose interest in space around middle school. So I think it's really important to have these organizations already in place to prevent that from happening. So just that right off the bat, I want to say a thank you to Mindy for doing that. And then also, anytime we start talking about space sustainability, my focus is just generally looking at, Earth orbit into some lunar sustainability. I always find the conversations around Mars intriguing. I have been reading A City on Mars recently. So if you're not familiar with that book, it does take a very realistic look at what it would take for us to go into space, and specifically looking at reproduction and if humans can even reproduce in space. So that's always a fun conversation to have. But yeah, this is going to be a really interesting conversation, especially looking both at the role women play in sustainability with space, and considering if you haven't looked at the project, the Gender Security Project, that they do a lot of work discussing astropolitics and a feminist perspective. So I definitely would recommend checking that out.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, well, and you hit on some points that are, near and dear to my heart in terms of, I mean, that's why I have this background, right? Like the space debris issue. And Charity, I'd love to, talk a little bit about that with you, given your background, right? And that's sort of been those, we shared that mission. I'm sure you still do, but in your transition from kind of the commercial sector to NASA, what of that conversation, did anything change? Like, are there different perspectives that you see coming at it from both sides, or is there a lot of alignment from kind of the commercial space sector as it relates to the space debris problem and solving for it, and then kind of the agency side?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, at first, I just want to recognize that, we're talking about sustainability, and not everyone may be on the same page of what that is. What are we actually talking about here? And let me just boil it down to something really simple. What you do today does not negatively impact tomorrow. That's it, right? You put a little forethought into what you're doing today so that you can continue to do the thing and others can do the thing tomorrow. And so that's what we're talking about, either in workforce, in the space industry, on technologies, on the industry side, how to have companies that can sustain themselves and sustain a presence in space. And yes, the environmental piece of it, of our in-orbit space debris problem. And this debris has been generated over 70 years, right? Humans went into space in 1957. The first piece of space junk was cataloged in 1957. This is not a new problem, but it's a changing problem. It's a complicated problem. And what has changed and why is it more complex today is we have access to space a lot more. There's more players. It's international. It's affordable. And we don't necessarily have the same, or we do have the same rules and international agreements that we did in the late 60s. But with this new era of thousands of satellites and commercial lunar destinations and just all this great activity, but we haven't really necessarily been able to have that forethought of how does it negatively affect us tomorrow. So that's where we are today. We, the international community, all of us, are thinking about this issue and going from, okay, so what do we need to do to let's start to take some action? And that's where the ties of the commercial industry and governments are starting to come together. So governments have a role, industry has a role here. Governments set policy, governments build regulation, governments create laws, and have state to state, that's nation to nation conversations and engagement. Industry, they have a requirement to get licensed. You have to go through an authorizer to be able to launch and have some space activity. And there are norms of behavior that one has to adhere to. There are international standards that one could adopt. There are even your own best practices. And so there are separation between what industry thinks about the issue and what government thinks about the issue. But I can tell you it is exactly the same intent to keep orbit sustainable so that we can all use it tomorrow. So let me give you a little bit of a numbers thing. And this is really important because we can't just make decisions and policy based on a whim or what we feel is right. We actually have to have some data behind it. And so we model the Earth orbit environment to kind of, on the pieces that you can't even track, you need to model like what's up there and how it impacts operations. So we have modeled approximately 100 million super teeny tiny pieces of human-made debris for the last 7 decades that we've been generating over time. Yeah. The pieces that are super hard to track but would really destroy a satellite, there'd be the size of a blueberry, right? Like about 1 centimeter. We're modeling and understanding that there's around 500,000 of these in orbit. And space is big, but did you know there's actually orbital highways that we use? There's ideal orbits for communications and remote sensing, and all the things we gain here on Earth are derived from space data. So we use specific orbits for these. So 500,000 of these in very concentrated orbits is bad news. And then the big stuff that we can track, that's on the order of 30,000 things size of a baseball or bigger. And that's a bad day if one of those hits you. But we can see them, so maybe we can get out of the way in time if you can maneuver. So there's a lot of that going on. Those are the kind of the numbers here. Now let's add that to the additional thousands of satellites that are being launched. All good, giving us broadband access, giving us so much data so we can, manage our resources and our agriculture and track fisheries and all the good stuff we get out of space. But those two worlds are starting to collide, forgive the pun, and we need to figure out what is the management piece of this. How do we remediate pieces, prevent debris from actually happening, and coordinate with each other? And because I said this is an international issue, that's a really difficult thing, and I'm sure Jourdan wants to talk about this as well, of how do we get all on the same page on what we're going to do? Like on highways, like if I turn right, I know who has right of way, kind of thing. Or if I turn left, I know who has right of way. We haven't really figured that out in space yet, and we have to do it on an international level. So a little bit of background, but yes, all of us want to see the space environment sustainable so we can continue to use it.
Yeah. Everything you've said is it's so powerful, but also there's if I wasn't in this, right, like all of us are, there might be like this feeling of fear or overwhelmingness, especially when you're talking about space debris and the fact that yes, we're gaining more access to space. How do all of you approach that? Is that even a thing that comes up? Fear, or this is way too much. Like I often hear space is too hard or space is hard, which I don't like that phrase, just because of sort of what it can imply. It's just another challenge for us. But how do you all approach that with your different audiences, whether it's children or whether it's policymakers, whether it's international? How do you approach that fear, that overwhelmingness? Like, I don't know, I don't think it's worth it. I'm gonna throw that to anybody.
Jourdan, why don't you take this one and I'll follow up.
That sounds good. Yeah, so it's odd to hear this statement. This isn't something that I've thought of. Like I from my perspective, it's like I like a challenge. I feel like a lot of people that go into the space industry like a challenge. So it's not, and also when you start looking at space sustainability, if you look at it as a whole, yes, it can be overwhelming. But like Charity said, if you start breaking it down by the orbital highways and you're looking at very specific aspects, there's not everyone is going after the same problems. People are splitting up. There's different approaches being used. So, it's interesting to think of it as fear when it's more of an opportunity to try something new and really see different areas where countries or people's companies can excel and come up with creative solutions. So I think that's really the best way to just maybe try to reframe it and help someone get more specific and what they are trying to accomplish or what they may be afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. In public policy terms, this is called a super wicked problem. And it sure is, because it has a human dimension to it. And I tend to think like engineers and scientists, they can figure it, like it's data driven. The thing either works or it doesn't. But when it comes to getting humans to do stuff, that's tricky. That requires a lot of time, a lot of engagement, a lot of commitment. And that's sometimes probably the long pole in the tent, is getting people to agree on an approach. So, here at NASA, we have a new space sustainability strategy. Let me give you an example of this. And we know this is a huge issue. And we know NASA has a role here to support. And so what the first thing we want to do in this strategy is build a framework. Like, let's put it all under the same umbrella. If I pull this lever and turn this crank, like, does that better the environment? Does it not? So we're actually looking at this framework right now and seeing, we have to build this machine of a framework so that we can understand what we're missing in data. And then you go look at those uncertainties, and you try to identify those uncertainties. You try to identify the policy gaps. And one thing we haven't talked about a lot that my office is doing is research in the economics of this. There is a financial bottom line if space continues to get congested. And so we put those three pieces together under a framework, and there you have a holistic profile that you can start taking action. And it's going to be action that actually makes a difference. So yes, is a big problem. I'm like Jourdan. I'm like a firefighter. I'm going to run towards the policy problems. That's why I love this job. It's like, what's around the corner? What are we not thinking of? What do we have to, start from scratch? What kind of policies do we need to think through? So yeah.
That's great, and I agree. Like that, I guess what I was more thinking about were the people outside of the industry, right? Because we're trying to convince the rest of the world. Mindy, like you said, 100 million girls, right? A pipeline that we don't have. And Mindy, I don't know if you come across that when you're talking to people, but is there a fear or this idea like it's too overwhelming, it's too much, like I don't I've got things here on Earth that are more important to me. Do you run into that at all?
I'm not running into that. No, I'm not running into that, luckily. So I think people, though, haven't thought about these numbers, to be honest. I think it's like the planning of getting that. You can have big dreams, and we're actually trying to take the steps to kind of go in that direction, with some planning involved. And I think for the most part, people haven't kind of broken it down and try to think like, well, if we need to get here by this time, what do we need? So I'm not even so sure people have thought that far, and therefore, like, there's no burning, no burning platform or whatever you want to call it, that says, oh, we have to do something now.
Yeah,
not seeing it. So yeah, this is a good form.
Yeah, well, and maybe it's maybe it's a communication thing. I don't know. Like it's I feel like one thing the space industry hasn't done so well, maybe it's getting better, but it's just like communicate what we are doing, right? Communicating those opportunities and the excitement. I mean, clearly NASA's done a lot of things, and the pictures and the videos and the launches. I mean, it's so exciting. But do you all feel like there is a communication problem, or and how do we, and is sustainability the headline that helps us change that? Because we are talking a lot about it, but what do you think?
Can I jump
please.
in?
Yes,
before
please.
we go into them, because coming from the communications field, I mean, I see this every day. I see news stories where you have a rocket launch that if it's a big launch, it's included in the newscast. And if it's a space story, sometimes it's buried toward the end, or it's a kicker, as we call it. I really don't see the in-depth reporting unless something goes wrong. And then it's, oh my goodness, look what happened. Let's talk about that breaking news. And unfortunately, you see this with news in general. And I think the communication needs to really be amped up with organizations and people who are experts on policy, like, you ladies are. I think it's going to have to be getting more of this information out there, and not just in the national media, but online in places where we do see a struggle, I feel, time to time with getting accurate information out there. And go ahead, anybody can comment on that.
I think communications is key here. I think of it in this way. When I'm talking to whatever audience, it could be public, it could be kids, it could be congressional members, I always take account of, do they acknowledge there's an issue? Do they agree there's an issue? Like, do they have enough data? And are they ready to act? And so you kind of have to bucket, and the public is just the acknowledge issue. So getting out there and talking about these, I think the public is very much receptive to the term of space debris, and they're paying attention. I'm seeing an uptick in that. And I think there's also an uptick in whenever there's a solution that's proposed, the public is also paying attention, because this is pretty cool stuff. If you're talking about remediation, that is removing a piece of space junk, that's pretty cool when you're getting two objects together, which normally you want to keep them apart, but you're purposefully trying to do this safely, connect, and that's pretty, that's pretty advanced, especially for a commercial community. So I think we're getting there, but surely there's more to do.
And I see with the UN adding, being petitioned to add space as the 18th Sustainable Development Goal, right, is space is part of a sustainable future. Therefore, we need space to be sustainable, right? It's right now, the case is still being made that space activities are part of a sustainable future, from the environmental monitoring to the exploration to the basic science and discovery and human exploration. So therefore, those activities need to be sustainable. So that it's almost it's a little bit confusing, because there's two conversations happening around sustainability in space. One, therefore the other. We don't want space to become nuclear, right? Or nuclear energy, right? Is nuclear energy. No one talks about all the fantastic nuclear power plants that don't blow up, right? But, going back to that negative press issue, we don't want, that narrative to develop, and then therefore this is not the future.
But at the same time, I think, a little incident, I won't say accident, but incident can always start the fires of engineers to try to fix things faster and put policy in that direction. If, if stuff is falling out of the sky, or, we're starting to see real negative impact, either predicted negative or actual negative impact, that people, or just people losing like cell phone capabilities, and they're like, that's hitting, that will all of a sudden, people will freak out if they don't have their cell phones doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think, you could ask why that is, and like, oh, something hit your satellite. Oh, interesting. What are you talking about? And then, I think that could also be, that's not a life or death thing, but it could be, depending if you're using a GPS for navigation, then all of a sudden you're like, I don't know where I'm going, whether that's a plane or whatever. So sometimes the negative, if it, not a disaster, but something, can actually, make those fires of invention and policy burn a little bit faster, a little bit higher.
A battery pack landing back in Florida, you mean? Not without causing too much damage.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, I mean, I think if we look back, and we talked about this in a previous episode about the auroras in May, I mean, how many people were talking about space then? I mean, personally, for space.com, I was writing up to like 2 to 3 articles a day, and taking this opportunity to educate people about, not just the auroras, but what goes into space weather forecasting, and how complex space weather is, and how it is more than auroras. I mean, yeah, they're beautiful, and it was a great experience, especially with Jourdan's like glowing behind her. but it was also a great teaching opportunity, especially to kids, and saying, hey, like, we have weather on Earth that's a forecasting challenge a lot. And then you also have a forecasting challenge when it comes to space weather. And some of those things can lead to power outages. I mean, you think about some of the previous events where we didn't have the prediction that we have now, and you had issues and grid failures in the 80s in Toronto. And now there's an actual policies and procedures in place where the Space Weather Prediction Center has calls with these agencies, or they have a hotline for them to call to know if they need to take the appropriate action to shut the grids down or prepare it. So if we did have a G5 magnitude storm, it's not going to give us the catastrophic impacts that we could have seen in the past, especially with technology advanced a lot more now.
Say Aurora 5 times fast.
Oh,
Sorry.
man.
Meredith, I think you brought up a really good point. And, you know, I chose these auroras because I am in Maine. I am located in Maine. We do regularly have visibility of the auroras here. We actually have a dark sky sanctuary in the state. So being able to view and maintain access to the cosmos is something that I find very near and dear to my heart. And I think my favorite thing about the auroras happening was, you know, I had my dad in North Carolina sending me text messages that he was excited for the opportunity to see them. And then you go online and, you know, it could just be algorithmic that this is all I saw on my social media, but it was everywhere. It wasn't just located in this part of the world. These things unite us globally. And that's really the importance of space. And when we're talking about communication and we're trying to build that sense of urgency within the population for what needs to be done so that we can still maintain access to space. You know, these are great launching pads. This is I appreciate the work you were doing, Meredith, on writing those articles. I had fun reading them. I had fun sharing them with people. So I definitely think, you know, it's the same thing with like James Webb. Anytime there's some positive aspect that we can latch on as a community and then start filling out the information of like, oh, this is cool, but did you know about this? You know, these are opportunities that we really have to grasp and run with.
This kind of reminds me of a term that goes like this: you can't prove a negative, right? All these unsung heroes, they're working towards sustainability here on Earth, in space. And if something does not happen, you'll never know, right? Because there's people behind the scenes working day in and day out, making this their life's work. And so recognizing that and getting that stories out there is important as well.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that, being in the media. I mean, yes, someone like me is a face, a public figure on the news, but there are so many people behind the scenes that are putting things together. You've got your writers, you've got your copywriters, you've got your producers, you've got your videographers, you've got, you know, people that are leading. And it's the same even in the space sector. And you've got policy writers and you've got people that are doing all this work behind the scenes, but then it's our job as public figures and people out there that are influencers to get the facts out and to make things, I think this is important, make things easy for everybody to understand. Because a lot of the policies are written and you'll read an article on that and it's like, you're reading the policy, you're like, I don't understand this. But when you have writers, when you're working and communicating with people that can read it and understand it and write it for the public, I think that's how we're really going to get our message across and keep the public engaged, because then they don't feel like it's too complicated for them to be involved in.
I would also I'm sorry, Charity. I was just going to add that, you know, we also have to keep in mind that it's not just us or our perspective. There is an international perspective, and different groups and different societies are going to look at space sustainability in different ways, you know. So I think that does add to the complication of it a little bit. Is it's not just how do you communicate it to your neighbor, it's how do you communicate it to the world.
Mm-hmm. And I think that dovetails really well into nuclear energy. Is nuclear energy, right? It's almost like the same as space. There's an international social thought around those activities. So be really interesting to see a study on that is, how did the thoughts and feelings behind nuclear energy evolve over time, and how do we leverage that with space sustainability?
Yeah, I'm dealing with a little bit of that with, getting girls in places who, it's not even okay to be an engineer, let alone an astronaut, in villages where these are not roles for women. And, how do you respect the local cultures and still try to kind of show the inspiration that, it's not going to bring shame to the family if your daughter turns into an astronaut. It can maybe do something the other way around. And these are very sort of real issues, and cannot always be thought about solutions with, someone who doesn't come from that culture. So we really need to sort of figure that out as well, that message for getting more girls in this particular case. But I think that cultural lens is a really good one to bring up.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was on a panel where Afghan girls robotics team was highlighted, and that transition, that whole workforce ecosystem and how it dovetails into space, I think, and sustainability. Okay, if you're working in space sustainability in some element, how does it connect back there? Same thing in the space industry. Showing that, hey, it's not just here and you're stuck in this this specific industry. You have these skill sets that are broadly applicable to these future endeavors in other fields, so that you can come in and you can come out. I think is also an important highlight.
Speaking of kind of the international policies and like what comes first, or what should come first? I don't know if that's the right question, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's we've got this commercial industry going strong. It's it kind of for the last several years. And now has that been the impetus for really trying to get a lot of these policies in place? Or because there's a great conference / boot camp called the Space Regulatory Boot Camp, where you kind of get a deep dive in anything and everything space law, and all these things related to licensing, like Charity, you mentioned, right? And the FCC, like who knew that there was limited spectrum and all these really incredible things that again, if you don't know about it, you could run into some issues. So like who's playing catch up, I guess, is maybe the best question here. And how do we speed things up?
I think all these processes have to go on at the same time. Yeah. But there is an international treaty called the Outer Space Treaty in the late 60s, and it has principles that anyone who signs on to the treaty would adhere to. And it specifically says that the state that signs on to the treaty should implement them. And so it's really on state by state. So the United States, who is a signatory of the Outer Space Treaty, it conducts their own, legal, regulatory policy adherence to that international treaty. So when it boils down with it, all politics is local in a way, where you get your own ducks in a row, figure out what is important for your nation and your values, and make sure you're in the conversations globally, but make sure your own laws and regulation are helping to advance those principles that one signs on to in these international treaties. And then everything outside that is best practice and normative. So it's not necessarily an international treaty per se, but it's just the way that things are done. And there's power in that. It's called peer pressure. We all feel it, right? And so getting those above and beyond items out there, maybe we should do this instead of that, and getting a group of like-minded states to kind of say, this is an important thing, let's bring it to the UN, or let's just agree upon it ourselves. That's all happening all at once. These domestic items that are being developed, the multilateral conversations, and those best practices where the commercial community is really strong here in building best practices, and then that international side as well.
just a controversial sort of point here about, if you look at what's happening, with SpaceX and all the satellites going up there. I mean, like nobody is stopping this from happening. Essentially, that we don't have the laws that and there's the whole commercial side of it, which is like, I'm in business and I'm going to do what I'm doing. NASA might be regulated, but I don't know if we can, get people in regular businesses to sign on for this if it's going to hurt their business. So that's kind of tricky. We can maybe regulate these, space agencies from doing things, or anyone who signs on. But then there's a whole bunch of people who will benefit from, sending stuff out in space that are not going to be so eager to sign on. And they're sending the most stuff out there. So it's tricky.
Just one thing on that. The Outer Space Treaty has, my favorite article on it is called Article 6. It's called Effective Oversight and Continuing Supervision. And what that means is the state that provides a license, or the launching state, is liable for their private citizen activities in space. So there is a hook into making sure private activities follow suit of international agreement as well. And again, that happens domestically. A conversation, if it's an actual rulemaking, a conversation with the public and industry on how to shape that regulation. A good example that was brought up was the FCC. They do this for spectrum allocation, but they also require a pretty thorough debris mitigation plan from private companies looking to gain a license. So it's a bit of a hook into that ability. Should we do more? Possibly. And that's why there's many reviews of regulation around the world right now on this very topic of like, how much is too much? Because we don't want to reduce the potential of space industry, but also getting back to the whole point of space sustainability is being able to do what we want to do without the negative consequences in the future.
I've actually seen, especially when you start looking at the different kind of like packs that are going around. You've got the Space Sustainability Rating, you've got the Washington Compact, you've got all these different agencies and industry folks coming together. So you really do see a collective effort to want to establish sustainability as a norm. And, I think the incentive and motivation behind it is definitely financial, because you're going to have cheaper missions. Things are going to cost less when you're not having to constantly maneuver your satellite, or you're actually able to complete the work that you're trying to use that satellite for, because you're not having to constantly move it out of the way for debris. There is a financial incentive for corporations and companies to adopt sustainability policies. And what's really interesting is seeing the different approaches internationally. I know Charity, you just spoke at the Portugal summit recently, which I did watch. So you have different countries coming together. I was just in Spain, and they a lot of what they were discussing at a space seminar I was on was talking about how they're going to establish sustainability policy within their own country. And then also looking at it broader, the European Union, they're having their election. So they've actually brought space sustainability policy into this conversation. So, I mean, it's, at least from a Western perspective, I would say it absolutely is part of the main focus. And even India has their zero debris policy as well. So I think we're seeing progress, and I think we're also seeing a want, which is necessary.
Oh, there's so much to think about. I mean, this conversation is it's really powerful, and I just, is there a value in also considering how we could turn that back onto Earth? I mean, I know, we certainly have the space remitigation that you talked about, Charity. There's a lot of the requirements that they've been updating in the last few years. But, it's one thing to say we're going to do this in space while ignoring the way we're doing things on Earth. So how do is there a way to flip it a little bit and say, look, let's prove it out here. I mean, clearly space debris is one thing, but in general, like if we can, really, try to fix things here so that we don't take them with us. Is there a reality? Is there a push? Is there something like that happening? Is there a way policy can make that happen in what you all are doing and seeing?
I think it's I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
Jourdan. Go ahead.
Please go ahead, Charity.
We probably have the same thought too. I try and think of sustainability as a continuum of from Earth to space and wherever we want to explore and operate. Now we don't have an atmosphere in space, and so there's different challenges of what do we track and how do we limit it. So those are very different time scales. If something breaks apart at 800 kilometers above us, it's there for centuries. Whereas if there's an oil spill, big effort and impact, but you can clean it up within a time horizon, essentially, hopefully, without too big. So that it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but I think knowing how to get best practices established, what are those financial incentives? There's a lot of lessons learned from climate discussions that we can bring to the space conversation. Vice versa, I'd have to think about that, but I'm sure I love the fact that space benefits from all sorts of industries and discussions. So the more we can cross-pollinate with the energy world and the healthcare world and climate change world, like we can benefit from all those ideas as well, whether it be a policy or an economic financial incentive perhaps is out there that is the magic cure for making all this work, and the technical side as well, robotics, for example. Like what are we doing on Earth that we can bring to space or for collecting space junk or vice versa?
So I brought up that book, A City on Mars, and if you start looking into it, you'll see some of the discussion. The authors are very upfront that they're probably the only people in the space community that aren't really excited about going to Mars and kind of advise against it to a large extent. But something that's discussed that I found extremely interesting is that, and this kind of goes back also to public perception of space. And you do hear backlash from people saying, oh, we need to fix problems here on Earth. Like, why are we trying to go to space? Let's spend the money on things here. So this approach is actually, it could be a good way to reframe that issue, is saying, a lot of times when we discuss space, we talk about all the innovations that happen in space that are later brought down to Earth and we benefit from. So, you have discussions about like, oh, well, if we can build a habitat that will be, able to sustain Mars, that's something technology we could use here on Earth later. And, I think it's maybe time to flip that script of saying like, hey, let's build habitats that can withstand the harshest impacts of climate change on Earth that later we could use on Mars. There might be an approach that needs to be redone. And I think that's also an interesting model as far as like funding. It might be difficult to get people really excited about putting the money into habitats on Mars, but it might be a little easier to get funding for habitats here on Earth. So I think there's a few different approaches and dialogues that we could have around it. But yeah, I think by the time we work out how we want to implement policy, especially like internationally, that is going to be a framework that we can say, hey, this worked internationally regarding space. Maybe it's something that we can be adopting for other issues.
Yeah, Meredith, did you have, did you want to throw in? Or I thought I saw your mic come off.
Yeah, no, I was just processing all that because I agree. The storytelling aspect, goes back to communication. How are we telling these stories? Because people always want, the number one thing is, how can I be impacted by this story? Because yes, it's like sitting around the dinner table. we all love it hearing other people's stories of the day. But then when there's that, well, how does this impact me story that's brought in, that's when you really like have that extra little pay of attention, because then you can contribute, then you can add things to it. And so I really like, Jourdan, how you're talking about rephrasing that, because yes, climate change is something that's happening now and is going to be forefront in addition to the expansion of the space industry. And so when we can work together and talk to these communicators and say, hey, we need to start maybe rephrasing, and that's also going to help us get the public more interested in what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I and when Charity, when you were talking, you know, it reminded me of this Tech for Climate Change conference that was in DC in February, and they had a space tech panel, you know, that was talking about the impact of space technology on what we're trying to fight here in terms of climate change. And so I think that's the thing too, is we you know, our industries can't remain maybe as siloed as they've been in the past, right? Like to your point, they all need to be talking to each other, working together. You know, we talk about dual use all the time as a space startup, because there are use cases. I mean, what technically what we're building for is still in the future a little bit, right? And so, but how could we switch that? To your point, Jourdan, that you know, that's I think that's a powerful shift that needs to happen for funding. I mean, you know, Cislunar Industries, we're trying to raise money. It's to say it's that conversation, and you know, most traditional VCs want a return on their investment pretty quickly, and so you know, looking that far out into the future is difficult for a lot of people. And so how do we, you know, how do we shift that? And then maybe that really helps if we can shift that perspective, that mindset. Maybe that really does then give us the opportunity to use the innovation and the ingenuity of the space industry to solve for even things like homelessness, or you know, the mental health crisis, or you know, whatever, any of those things that, again, we don't want to take those with us when we go. And so it's such a great conversation. Thank you all for being here. You know, I think it's really powerful to continue to have this. And I feel like this particular conversation, we're starting to see, you know, space sustainability conferences more and more, which is awesome. There's one in Japan, you know, in July, you know, to see more of that focus come into play. I think we need more of that. We need more storytelling, Meredith, like you're talking about. We need more, you know, more just communication and conversation with everybody to, you know, to the work that Mindy's doing. We need all human voices in this conversation, whether they want to go to Mars or not, right? Like they should still have a say in what we're trying to do to become a spacefaring civilization. So Jourdan, Charity, Mindy, thank you all so much. This has been a really incredible conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
See everybody next month.
Absolutely. Thanks, team.